Raquel Willis, co-founder of Gender Liberation Movement, and welcome to one of 4 roundtables for Trans Week of Visibility and Action, which GLM is hosting from March 25th through the 31st. This week, we're making one sustained argument. Gender liberation is for everybody. So the fight for trans rights, lives, and liberation is connected to everybody's fight for bodily autonomy, self-determination, and the pursuit of fulfillment. So our conversation right now is centering amazing affirming mothers and aunties in this growing movement of affirming families. We'll be talking about much more than just the political attacks on trans youth, because we know that it's happening not just to them, but also to the ecosystem around them. And it's happening beyond kitchens. It's happening in schools. It's happening in doctors' offices, at the border, and so much more. But affirming families are making powerful and important decisions right now about whether they're going to stay in this, fight this, or flee. And I'm saying flee, but that doesn't mean that the fight stops, which you're going to hear more about as well. And GLM also wants to be honest about the fact that it was important for us to gather parents and also just adults in the lives of trans and non-binary youth from so many different backgrounds, because we often hear very limited stories. And so to kick off our roundtable, I'm going to do some short bios and then we're going to get to all of the goodness. So our panelists today are Jodie Patterson, who is an affirming mother, author, advocate, and the first Black chair of the Human Rights Campaign board. Then we have Rebecca Minor, who is an affirming mother and an LICSW. I'm going to get Rebecca to give us the breakdown of what all those letters mean for the uninformed. So go for it right now, Rebecca, and unmute yourself.
Lord. LICSW means I am a licensed independent clinical social worker. So I'm a social worker by training, and it's the highest licensure, so I can work on my own and do my own thing.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you. Rebecca is also an author. We also have Sonia Murphy, who is an affirming advocate auntie, and Lizette Trujillo, an affirming mother. And I get to see Lizette on a regular basis as the GLM Affirming Adults Facilitator. So we're going to jump into this first question. Was motherhood something that you always imagined for yourself? What did it take to get here? And what did you have to redefine along the way? Or what are you continuing to redefine? And Jodie, I'll let you kick us off.
First of all, some of my favorite people are on this Zoom, so I'm so glad to be here. I feel like I want to see you with a hug, but this is second best. Thank you for having me. I always wanted to be a mom. Not everyone does, but I did. When I was in grade school, I had these big ambitions. I said I wanted to be a mother, a teacher, and a high-powered woman in like a corner office with big shoulder pads. I had this idea of what success looked like, and it was, in a sense, leadership and mothering combined. And of course, it's very different now in reality, but a lot of that initial feeling is what I'm experiencing now as a mom. I'm a mom of 5, curiously different people, ages 16 to 32, living in the States and abroad, cisgender, transgender, atheist, faithful, night owls, sneakerheads, manga heads. I mean, we have a real diverse group in my little city that we are orchestrating. I was having this conversation with my 16-year-old the other night, and it was a teary conversation on my end because who I thought I would be as a mother and what I thought the experience would be and what I thought the energy in our house would always be is not what it is. You know, there's a lot of times when we are snuggly and happy and giggling and at the same table in the same moment with no headphones in a good mood. But most of the time, it is not that way. At any different moment, somebody is unhappy with me. I've disappointed someone. People are in and out of phases of wanting to be mothered. I don't know if anyone has children who are in their upper teens and 20s. And I think that's a part of the growing phase of individuals. And so, yes, so the disappointments sometimes are just the reality of watching your kids grow up and watching them become independent. And so I've had to shift my idea of what snuggly love looks like. And I now call it just consistent, ever shifting love.
Amazing. Thank you, Jodie. Just giving us like the full gamut of what motherhood entails. So I'll kick it to you, Lizette. Do you want to share your response to this first question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for pulling this panel together. All three of these people have been an influence in my life. I value everything that they share all the time. So we are in good company tonight. I did want to be a mother, actually, and I thought I would have more children, and my body just didn't do that. And that was okay. I think the best advice I ever got was from my own mom, who I had a difficult relationship with over my lifetime, and I'm grateful for the place we are today. But the best advice I got was, you've never been a mom before, and they've never been alive before. And so every stage of life will be new to the both of you. It's an opportunity to get to know your child every step of the way. And I think that was really helpful. And I'm an Aries, Scorpio, Capricorn. So like that tells you that I'm like controlling, like I need to get it right. I want to be a perfectionist. So I was that mom that was like, we're going to do this. Like, I'm going to get this right. I'm going to be perfect. I'm going to take the lessons learned from my own relationships with my parents, and I'm going to be better, do better. And then obviously we fail along the way, right? Like as our children try to come out and share who they are, we're going to fail and we're going to, make it right. And so I think for me, I've needed to be better at is to learn how to apologize. Because again, I gave you my chart and we don't want to say sorry sometimes. And we have to. Learning when to apologize, learning when to be a support, learning how to ask someone you love, do you want me to fix it or do you want me to listen? And also recognizing the ways in which our own journeys intersect with our children's journeys, because we too have genders and sexualities. And depending on how we question them or came into that space of our own identity, how we learn to love our children through that and give them tools to help them navigate the world. So I'm glad that you're asking this question because it's complex. I don't think any of us are going to feel like we got it right 100%, but we keep trying.
You keep trying. And I love that you shared, I think the influence of your experience of being mothered, because I think that that's a part of the conversation we often lose, right? Is that moms don't just pop up out of nowhere, right? Parents don't just pop up out of nowhere. It's building on or building for the first time, maybe something that they didn't see that they want to course correct, maybe for the next generation to come. Rebecca, let's kick it to you.
Sure. I also always wanted to be a mom, and I, took care of kids all through my growing up years. Through it's how I made money in grad school. I nannied and all the things, but it was not until 3.5 months ago, that I actually had my own baby. So I'm coming to you with my first cold because my baby got a cold, and now we all have a cold, which I think is part of mothering. It wasn't an easy road to become a mom, and I wasn't expecting that. I had thought, I spent my whole life trying not to get pregnant. And then it turns out it's not that easy all the time. We went through a number of years of fertility treatment, taking a lot of the same medications that my clients take and that some of your kids have taken to become more fully who they are, which was a really interesting parallel at the same time as writing a book about parenting, of like desperately trying to become a parent. So there's just all these moving parts that have ultimately resulted in me becoming a parent, which has been really special and also incredibly humbling. And a girl is tired. And I think the thing that I'm continually redefining or working on is just really accepting that, like, I don't have the answers and I probably never will. And things are going to keep shifting and changing as soon as I start to feel like, oh, we have some routine or I know what's happening. And then boom, things shift. So I think embracing that uncertainty that as a therapist, I tell parents to embrace all the time, but now I'm getting to experience that for myself.
Yeah, I mean, it must be wild to hold those two vantage points at the
It is
same
wild.
time. Wow. Thank you, Rebecca.
Yeah.
And then Sonia, you are also holding multiple vantage points as a mom and also as an affirming auntie. Shout out to the affirming aunties.
Thank you. Yeah, I love this question as well. I, like Rebecca, always wanted to be a mom. And I was the nanny in college. I babysat all through high school. Like, I just love kids. So that was easy. I think the harder part is the part about redefining for me. And being an auntie is consistent with being a mom, right? Love to be around kids. That was not the challenge. I think the redefining moments for me, two of them, were losing my sister and the role of auntie sort of broadening into motherhood, and then having the unique aspect of my nephew inviting me in, sharing with me who he is, and not having my sister to say, "Oh God, what do we do?" Right? And having to literally step into her mothering shoes to say, what would she do? And the second part for me that applies to all of mine, I've got 3 children and I count my nephew amongst my children, is realizing that they're not my mini me. I think there was a subconscious part of me that thought, I had 2 girls. Then I get my nephew. I'm like, nope, no worries. This is all fine. All 3 of them are sort of subconsciously my little mini me's, and I can just copy paste my story. They'll go to the same schools, they'll do the same things. And I quickly learned that each of them, in their own ways, separate and apart, even just from gender identity, have their own unique stories and characteristics and desires, and some of them are outside of the bounds of what I saw for them. And the ability to sit with that, reckon with that, tap into their purposes and help them thrive in their purposes, separate and apart from my vision, that has been sort of the pivot or sort of redefining moment for me in being a mom.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Sonia. I love the mini me part. And I feel like I've heard that from my own mom. I've benefited from having a very affirming mother myself as a Black trans woman, which has been, I think, also probably the connective thread of why I've seen so much power in you all along the way and just been able to like bounce off of y'all. I also just want to give a shout out. We were supposed to have another panelist to really represent the trans mom perspective, and she couldn't join us, unfortunately. So I do want to give a shout out to Precious Brady Davis, who just also had an election, right? So it's no wonder that there's so much on her plate. But I do think, in hearing from y'all, the need for us to expand how we talk about motherhood. I'm not a mother in the traditional sense. I'm an auntie, an affirming auntie. I have 5 nibblings from my origin family, and then so many just out there in the world. And then I think just thinking about some of our figures like Miss Major, who we call Mama Major, like I'm now sometimes in a role of mothering a movement, right? And I know y'all are also moms and parents and aunties for the kiddos and maybe not quite so kiddos in your lives right now, and mothering and auntieing our movement as well. So I just wanted to make sure that people are aware of those threads. Jodie, I'm going to kick it back to you. You've been publicly fighting, advocating since really before many institutions had language for it. I always remember that Cosmo video. That was my introduction to you and your family. And that was just so eye-opening for me. I'm curious to hear from you because I want to know what visibility and holding that visibility for your family has looked like over this more than a decade
over the
now
time.
of being, on the
Yeah,
front lines
that
in that
that
way.
video was like more than 10 years ago, right? It feels like that was an easier time. One, small kids, you could scoop them up, you can fix things for small kids. You can buffer your kid from the world. I was always 2 steps ahead of my children, my trans child, but all of my kids. I would walk into every room first. I would look the camp counselor in the eye. I would look the other parent in the eye, and I would talk about my politics and I would talk about my family. And if I ever noticed anything strange, I would just leave, and I wouldn't even let my kids interact with any bigotry, any transphobia, any racism, any sexism. And so I had the ability, a mom of young children, to curate. I could choose where they went and I could be there with them. And so I think at that time when we were asked to do this Cosmopolitan video, mini documentary. They had no idea. They had just listened to their readers, and the reader said, we want to know about blowjobs, facial contouring, and trans people. This was literally the round table of what they wanted from the magazine. And the magazine didn't have any trans friends or families, or other than celebrities. They didn't know any people that were living and breathing in this real everyday life that identified as trans. And so one person knew Jodie. And they said, oh, I have a friend and she's raising some kids and one is trans. Came to our house. We shot in our own voice with no prompting. They didn't have a best practice. We just got to speak our mind. And that video, my children all agreed. I asked, do you want to do this? Would you like to be in a video? Would you like to be in a magazine? And for years leading up to that, I think there were 3 years where they said no. This particular year, they said yes. So it was all with the blessings of my kids, not really knowing what that meant. That video got, I think, 11 million views in the first week, and it has become training, diversity training for all employees of New York. So bus drivers recognize us, park cleanup folks recognize us, teachers, people on the street stop us all the time. Hey, I saw your family. Good job. I have questions, or I love what you were doing, or I don't like what you're doing sometimes. But then it wasn't invasive for us. It didn't feel, it felt almost powerful. We were able to see ourselves powerfully, beautifully. The lighting was good. We were speaking our truth. And the comments that were coming up on social media, my kids didn't see. I saw the comments. Many of them were negative, but they felt more like information to me. Like I could see where the split was: religion, socioeconomics, culture. I could use that, the criticism, as an understanding, a way to understand why we don't see eye to eye on things. And it allowed me to address the community in a different way. Now, fast forward 10 plus years, it's harder. I almost want to scrub myself from the internet sometimes. I almost want to not be anybody's business but our own. I want to like mind our own small business. But every time I say that, I'm like, shit, my business is global. So I kind of want to be small, but then I want to be doing all the things and speaking and discovering new ideas about humanity. But I think this period right now is harder. The problems that my children face as young adults, I can't fix. I can't buffer them. They're out in the world by themselves. And that's, to me, is scary. When you talk about like all the stuff that's happening, healthcare is an issue in my house. Traveling is an issue, passports and whatever. School, teachers, bias amongst peers, violence on the streets. These are all issues that I cannot buffer anymore. So I think today, even though it's 10 years of visibility and 10 years of becoming very confident in our family dynamics, the backdrop is harder and harsher.
Yeah, I mean that the wave of visibility is no joke. It's not inherently, a beneficial thing, definitely at this point. And Lisette, as another mother who has also been very visible, I think particularly visible in the increasing kind of years of attacks. What is coming up for you as you kind of hear Jodie talk about the visibility piece, and what are the similarities or differences for your family?
In terms of where we were headed, visibility felt important. I think we came around like 7-8 years later, right? And we were living in a state that is often a test state. We were in Arizona, and you're talking about like 2018, we were starting to see anti-trans legislation like really kind of infiltrate our state. And we were the state with the first bathroom ban in 2013, and they were able to defeat it. And so I think for us, we were seeing so much positivity, and we were seeing parents speak out. And what I wasn't seeing very much of were parents of color. And I wasn't seeing parents who came from intersections, immigration. We're really seeing a lot of Latinx, Chicanx families being represented. And I felt like our stories were just as important to tell. Obviously, Jodie was sharing her experience, but Jodie was one of, I think, like maybe 2 parents of color who were able to kind of come forward and say, our families look a certain way. We are diverse. We share multiple identities in our home. We are experiencing policy and in a really impactful way in proximity to our child, but we also come from people who understand what the impacts of harmful policy look like. And we too understand how to navigate policy in your day-to-day life. Our story is not only informed by supporting our children, but also informed by our own kind of experiences in the world as communities of color. I don't want to throw a stereotype, but from our cultural background, it was very much like, this isn't us. This isn't our culture, is what we would hear a lot from family, right? Like, trans people don't exist among us. This is American. This is different, and we don't understand it. I, as a bisexual person, as someone who had cousins who were queer, I knew that there was this idea that we don't exist in our communities, but we do. We're just shamed into silence. I think for us, visibility meant, how do we communicate those intersections so that when people hear our stories, they can feel connected to it, they can feel seen by it, and they can also connect the dots between struggles, because we're more powerful together, right? I think that's what I've always loved about GLM, is that there's this conversation around repro rights and trans rights and these intersections around immigration and race and our histories before. And oftentimes, especially like in the beginning when we were seeing families come forward, those connective tissues couldn't be talked about because it was through someone else's lived experience. And so visibility, it's important. And oftentimes there's a cost. I think most of us sitting here can say we've experienced, threats to ourselves, threats to our families. And so there's always a cost to doing what's right and to speaking out for what's right. I wish more people could see that our families are not just trying to be the face of a movement, but we're trying to call in everyone else to join us in making this world more just.
Yeah, just in response to that, it feels like 10 years ago, the packaging of it was cleaner. And I saw that, it's like what television goes through waves where there's like clean family stories and everyone's happy, slight differences amongst the families. Maybe it's a Black family. But in the telling of our stories 10 years ago, there was a very clean, happy presentation. But this little tiny thing that was different, we're all the same, but this little tiny thing, one child is trans. And now I think there's a focus on the darkness from the media, the perceived difference. There's a focus on the complication. And so when we were 10 years ago, we were talking about the joys of being a trans family. And now we're just protecting ourselves from the stereotype around sexuality and healthcare and safety and sports. But that is one of the biggest things I've seen change. The narrative of how they're describing us as families is drastically different now.
For sure. I mean, there's definitely been a concerted effort, right? Which I think the broader population doesn't understand, is that you've been re-indoctrinated in a way, right? We all had some level of indoctrination that ignored the realities of transness or gender and the complexity of it. And then we've just, in the last over 10 years, had this concerted effort to paint trans people of any age, of any background, as a threat. It only compounds if you're of color, if you're from a mixed status in terms of citizenship family, or anything else. And while we're on this thread, I mean, Sonia, I'd love to hear from you about your perspective on this as an auntie, an affirming auntie in the Black community. What are you yearning for more folks to understand, to Lizette and Jodie's point, that trans folks and families that are expansive have always been here?
Yeah. I echo both Jodie and Lizette's points. I think for us coming into this a little bit later, we came to this journey around 2020 in the midst of COVID. So I did a lot of internet research, and that's how I found Jodie and eventually came to Lizette and connected with so many people. But there was absolutely a lack of representation of families that look like mine. And also a lack of advocacy from people who look like us. And for me, that was baffling because as people of color, I'm like, we're the people who lived through the civil rights movement. We're not new to this, we're true to this. So where are you? Why are we now silent? And that led to our visibility because I just felt like The people in my life, not just my family, but anybody connected to me, there was no room to be silent on issues of importance to our family and our community. And I felt like everyone was being silent. And so I thought, well, if I put myself out there and I'm willing to be vocal and to share what our family is experiencing, perhaps it will uncover, like remove the veil that this is not happening in the Black community, that we are not existing. And we all know we do exist in the Black community, families like ours. And I had the added element of being an auntie, as you mentioned. So in the Black community, it's very common. We raise people's kids. Come on, that baby don't cry when I'm here, so give me the baby, right? That's what we do. So it's like my family, we had all of these elements that were sort of unspoken dynamics in our culture, but no one was willing to open up and be willing to talk about dynamics with respect to gender liberation. Why not? Why not? That bothered me, particularly again, because we are not new to this. We've had to be vocal. We've had to fight before. We've had to speak up. We've had to put ourselves on the front lines. And so for me, it's like, well, why are we being silent now? We cannot pretend and be silent. And as we've seen, right, even over the last 5 years, when you talk about the darkness that Jodie mentioned, that to me in some ways has been allowed to happen because there weren't enough of us telling our stories and being vocal before the last recent 5-year onslaught. When it's one person, like when it's just Jodie's family, it's easy to say, oh, that's just Jodie's family. It's nobody else, that's just Jodie's family, just one. And if more of us were willing to be visible, there is power in numbers. And as you've said, our issues completely overlap. I went to the Howard University School of Law, where we were taught that a lawyer is either a social engineer or a parasite on society. There is no way to disconnect human rights and civil rights and pretend that you are in your little corner of the world and you believe in body autonomy, but you have no interest in having conversations about what's happening to trans folks. There's just no way. These threads are interconnected. We are in this together. We are stronger together. I think my visibility and my work has come from wanting to be clear that we are connected and that this work is important and we must do it together.
Wow. Wow. Again, like that was a testimony. Thank you. Rebecca, I want to bring you in here to add another layer to the question. So you're also parenting from a queer Jewish experience and lens. I'd like to hear from you on what it has been like to be a clinician, working with parents, trying to advocate for them to listen to their children. And now we have so many forces saying, actually, don't listen to your children, correct them. Can you talk about holding all of that at once in your work?
How much time do you have? Yes, I would love to talk about it. And also, just want to say, because I didn't say it earlier, this is a stacked panel, and I am honored to be a part of it and feel like having earned my place as a mother now feels especially special to be in spaces like this. I know I've gotten to do mother-related things with some of you, and you were all like, it's okay, you're mothering all the kids. And I do, in many ways, I feel like I've been a mother for a long time. But it does, like you said, it adds all these layers. So I think, right, the phrase I always come back to and that I'm constantly telling parents is like, follow your kids' lead, listen to them when they tell you who they are. But that question of like, well, what if providers, what if the systems that are supposed to be listening to them to provide them the care that they need aren't listening? What does that mean for them? In clinical spaces, our job has never been to decide who a child is. It's to create the conditions where they can safely explore, be understood, and express who they are to us. But what's happening right now is that those conditions are being completely disrupted, right? Providers are afraid. Hospitals are preemptively pulling care. People are pre-complying with orders, right? Families are being told to wait or second guess, and they're put on a list, and God knows how long it will take until they get access to it. And the cost to kids is profound. When the adults who are supposed to trust you don't, they don't just question their identity, they question whether or not they are knowable and worthy of being known at all. And that's where we see these increases of anxiety and depression and withdrawal and the rates of suicidality that we hear and talk about. And it's not because being trans is harmful. but being disbelieved and unsupported is. What I want affirming parents to understand is that, again, your role is not to have perfect certainty, clarity, have all the answers, know all the terms, but to stay in relationship with your kid when the world is trying to pull away from both of you. And that the relationship is the intervention. That's the protective factor. And continuing to show up and say, I believe you, I see you, I love you, and I'm here. We're going to ride this wave together is what I think all of us have to do right now, because there's too many forces working against that connection. And that's where our strength is.
What you said just made me remember a quote that I've heard and said many times, and that is that acceptance does not require understanding. It is okay to not understand. It's okay. Right. And I think that's a part of like going way back to your first question about what things we've had to redefine in mothering. And I think just in life, period, it's okay to not understand. And many of us are not comfortable sitting in a space of a lack of understanding. And so we're doing all the work to try to understand every piece before we show the love and the care that's necessary to be an affirming adult in a child's life. Knowing every term and mastering the right lingo, all of that's unnecessary. It helps, but understanding is not required for acceptance.
And I would take it a step further and say there are a lot of things that we participate in and rely upon that we don't understand. I don't understand how my cell phone takes my voice and sends it to Switzerland where my daughter is. I don't understand the technology of AI. I don't understand a lot of things, and I believe in them. I use them. I respect them, tools and science and people. But this one thing, there is a demand for such clarity, and the continuous questions that we have been bombarded with year after year after year. I've told my friends, you can ask me 1,000 questions and I could give you 1,001 answers, and you still would want to know more. So why don't we put the questions in our pocket and just carry on with the day? One of my kids, this was years ago, said, I respect my brother, but I believe that fundamentally they are a girl, and I'll always use the right pronouns, but if we're talking about science, you can't just change your gender. This was my little shorty talking a long time ago. And in my house, we had this thing called the lab where we would be able to talk anything that was on our mind, talk truth, whatever our truth was, whatever our perspective was at the time. And we're looking at different age gaps and different levels of experience. So the truth sounded different from every single one of us. And we didn't agree on gender for years. And we never did at the end of the conversation, which would be an hour-long conversation. One person saying, I am who I am. The other person saying, but we have to stick to science. And of course, that science was uninformed because he was only 10 at the time. And there is science to prove gender fluidity, gender diversity. But the point is, we still didn't agree 5 years into this conversation. And I really find that the point is not to agree. The goal is to disagree with decorum. Because in our house, we've lived together as conservatives, cis, trans, black, white. In my own house, we don't agree. We would still, at the end of every day, eat dinner together, sleep in the same bedrooms, use the same bathrooms. So if we can disagree with decorum, more than half the battle is done.
Disagree with decorum. I think that's going to be one of the big one line like takeaways from here, right? Because we got a lot of work to do. And y'all are doing the work day in and day out by just living, speaking your truths, fighting on the ground. Lizette, I want to kick it to you because you've talked about, building community in Tucson, Arizona, and beyond. And also, this is a time where we're having to understand how our families are being targeted in so many different ways, right? It's not just that a family might have a trans child or a trans person that's a part of it. Our families could be mixed status, right? We might have families that are dealing with a time of being super anti-immigrant, right? We're dealing with anti-Blackness, anti-Latinx sentiment, and so much more. I wanted to give you space to kind of talk about what it's been like for your family facing so many threats in this time of increased hate in so many different ways, and how y'all are continuing to find power.
When we began our gender journey, as I like to call it, we faced rejection from our family, our immediate family. And my husband Jose is the youngest of 10. Daniel was the 23rd grandchild. And so we had like an ecosystem of people to be around. When we told our family we are affirming him, and if you're not a part of this journey, that's okay. We can make family. That's what we decided to do. And so we found a parent community in our area that was already in existence. And what I recognized as one of 3 women of color in that space was that they were navigating the world like immigrants, right? Like, does somebody know how to correct our identity documents? Do you know where's a safe after school program? What school districts are safe? What do I need when I register? How do I navigate social transition in the school system? And this was obviously 2015. I like to tell people that our children did not have rights in 2015. You just had parents who began challenging them in the courts, which is what brought about like this whiplash in legislation. And so we were navigating systems that were not built to support our children. We were advocating for our children and learning policy and learning how we were protected in school systems and in doctors' offices as we made mistakes. And I was hearing these families talk and share resources and information with each other, not realizing that that's what immigrant communities do all the time. That's why communities of color hub together, because that's how you help each other navigate systems that hold you back and keep you out. And when I had the opportunity to facilitate that space, I was like, hey, let's reframe. Let's talk about how do we show up wholeheartedly for our children and begin to disrupt the ways in which we as parents navigate these types of spaces. How do we expand conversations with our family members? I think what's really important is that we live in a permission-based society. And so we frame the conversation. We give each other permission for what's allowed and what's acceptable. I think that's why you hear like that acceptance comment a lot. It's because, or people asking a lot of questions. It's because they as parents are afraid, less so about their child's identity, but how they're going to have to respond to the world around them and navigating oftentimes marginalization for the first time on their own. And so how do we empower parents to talk about gender? How do we empower families to expand the conversation? Because at the end of the day, liberation, right, or these terms of freedom happen in our homes first, and then trickle out as we begin to have more language and conversations that empower our children and empower the communities around us. And so community is powerful. It's how we help each other out. It can also be scary. Like for us, we never shared that we were in a multi-status home because it was a predominantly white support space. How could we share that with people we maybe didn't trust or know? And so ultimately, I always tell parents that finding community is how you find what you need. You don't know what you don't know. And oftentimes I agree, let your child lead. That phrase is misleading because your children too are coming into their own and they don't have all the answers. And as a woman of color, also, I really thought it was important, and I think that it's what's made the difference in Daniel's life, is that he needed to see himself reflected in the world around him. And community gives you that, right? He will say that there wasn't a day until we moved abroad, unfortunately, that he was not reflected in his peers, in his elders, and in the world around him. And being able to see yourself and see a future self and see and learn from the people around you is the greatest gift. And I think that oftentimes in parent community spaces, parents tend to isolate themselves from actually building the world that they say they want for their children. And then they use harmful protective measures that I believe truly do not lead to equality, freedom, liberation, whatever language feels comfortable to someone listening to this conversation. What it ends up doing is perpetuating harm. And so if we really want to create households, neighborhoods, school districts, communities, we have to be willing to engage and be bridges and to make sure that each of those spaces are diverse, are welcoming, and safe.
It's kind of the perfect closer for us. It's important for us to build the world that we want trans youth, non-binary youth, all youth to see. We need the cis kids as well to see that there's so much complexity out there because they're hurting too. They're locked in these boxes that don't work for
Yeah.
them as well.
Yeah.
Jodie, do you want to share something before I wrap?
Well, I just like what you said, although I started out, and many of us did start out really focusing on the safety and the needs of the trans child that was growing up in a home. During this journey, on this journey, it gave me insight into myself. It gave my other children, who are now young adults, insight into themselves, because all of us have a uniqueness inside of us. As I was fighting for my son's ability to be free and express himself and show up as he is, I realized that I needed to do the same. The journey of being a mother of a trans kid is probably one of the best things that happened to me and to us because it really showed how tight we were living. And my goal now is to really just be expansive in all ways. And so I'm never going to lose sight of trans issues because they're so important. And at the same time, I recognize it to be universal issues. And I'm not co-opting the experience. I'm saying that I get it from a fundamental perspective. This is not about a few strange people. It's about the global humanity, which is pretty damn strange in the best way possible. And so I love this idea that we are investigating how strange each of us are and protecting that strangeness, protecting those differences, because it is the beauty of individual families and of the cultures. I wanted to end on a high note. It's probably one of the most mind-blowing things, one of the most liberating things, and one of the most life-changing things in terms of the way I even interact as a 55-year-old woman who thought I knew everything. It's beautiful to see the complexity of humanity. And the one last thing I will say is when my friends who are dear to me would say, "Hey, Jodie, we believe you, but we're not going to start fighting for trans rights until Black people are free." And I would say, "Okay, guys, that might be forever because we will be forever fighting for liberation. And we can't split the child in half because the child is Black and trans. So what are we going to do here?" And like, come on, guys, we got to get in this fight. And as we see now, everything is connected. So here we are talking about our children and also ourselves.
Unfortunately or fortunately, none of us can live up to these ideals around gender, right? You're never going to be a perfect man or perfectly masculine or the perfect woman or perfectly feminine. So let it go. You got to let
Let it
it
go.
go and not live so tight. I want to end on that note because I love that framing. Like we can live a little looser, and looser is freer. It's liberating. So I want to thank you all for this time. Jodie, Rebecca, Sonia, Lizette, this was such a beautiful, powerful conversation. I'll speak, personally for me to be able to witness you all loving expansively in this way. It just gives me so much hope because I'm very close with my mom, right? And I also think how much closer we could have been if I could have been myself sooner. And it wasn't her fault or anyone, right? It was society. It was what we had access to. And she got caught up when she did. And here we are. She called me right before this conversation. So I just want to thank you all for the example that you're setting for so many folks. And this is what gender liberation for everybody looks like in practice.
We look up to you as well, Raquel. We really do. You have shaped the future for our children in so many ways and also for ourselves. Like you gave us language, you gave us a calmness in your beauty, in your confidence, in your success, in your regular way you live life. Like we don't have to think about this as a crisis. We can just be like, Raquel did it. She's living it. It's a real blessing to have people to see who are trans and living a regular life. Thank you. We love you.
I just want to echo that. Daniel sees you and you are part of his generation and you are opportunity and you are pride. He gets to live in a world alongside you from far away, but alongside you that says, I can exist fully. That's what you bring to the table. So thank you.
Because representation matters. It matters.
We love
All
you.
Thank you.
right. Thank y'all. I love
Yes.
y'all. And I can't
Yes.
wait for folks to see this conversation.